maybe I agree. Yes, he said they need to fix it, but he didn't say how, and it's probably not the same way as you wanted. So.
Good, and that seems a good point to open it to the floor and invite some questions. If you can introduce yourselves, and if your question is targeted at any particular of the panelists, that would be helpful. So.
Thank you. My name is Peter Wojcik. I'm with the European Chemical Industry and Bryony. I'm speaking for a sector that is the biggest emitter and the biggest energy user in the manufacturing industry. So I'm not speaking for nobody. And I'm very much with Robert, with his comments. So, by the way, what Mr. Tyson said is not necessarily the position of the whole power sector at all. And some of the colleagues that heard his speech were quite surprised. So it's not at all a done deal. Maybe he finds ETS is failing, is bust, as he said. We feel ETS is exactly delivering what it's supposed to deliver. If you want to make it a money fundraising machine in an economic crisis, then welcome. I think the chemical industry is not yet a non-profit organization like the one you are working for, and we don't want to be one, to be honest. But the policy you would suggest is moving us in that direction.
Okay, there wasn't actually a question there, so...
Thank you, Sonja van Rensen for European Energy Review and Nature Climate Change. Two questions. The first one to Mr. Liese. Can you give us a feel at all for discussions within the ITRE committee, whether you're considering both the options that Ms. Worthington put out? Is it just the set-aside or just the 1.74%, or both that are currently up for discussion? And secondly, to Mr. Delbeke. Again, from your perspective, you've spoken about the idea of a set-aside, from what I understand. The idea of adjusting the reduction factor, how could that come about? And more generally, how can you... well, Philip Lowe asked a question this morning, which he didn't really get an answer to, but how is it possible at this stage to intervene in the market to fix it without introducing yet more uncertainty for the market? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, even though it's not easy to answer. The decision in ITRE is not easy to predict. We have many amendments on the table, and the front is not as maybe you normally would assume. For example, the shadow rapporteur of the GUE, left, Nordic Green left, in a first discussion was completely against any intervention, while in the ENVI committee, and I hear it also from other colleagues from the GUE, they say this must be much more ambitious than what I ever have been able to discuss about. So there's unclarity inside the groups. What is clear, in my view, is that the British colleagues from all different parties, including the ECR colleagues, see that we have a problem there. And that's why we may not have the opportunity to discuss all the questions here today. That's why I decided to have another event like next week with Giles Chichester and other colleagues. So I spoke to Giles shortly, and he said, of course, we need to do something. What? We need to consider. I would suggest that inside the Thomas report on the energy efficiency, we cannot modify the linear factor. This is for another debate, and we need careful analysis of this. But in the ENVI committee, there was broad consensus, and I hope some of this consensus will survive in ITRE, that the Commission needs, as soon as possible, analyze the effect of the energy efficiency directive. It's not clear, but the Commission officially said, DG Energy, not DG Climate, that there are scenarios that the price will go down to zero. So then we have a problem. And we have adopted this amendment that would be a one-off intervention on the certificates. So I think that is the base for discussion, but I cannot predict what will be the outcome of the ITRE vote. And definitely we have, of course, another debate going on, that is the report of Chris Davis on the low-carbon roadmap. It is non-legislative, but we also need to discuss this. And I would really ask everybody in the room here to take the concern serious, also the carbon leakage concern. It is not true that we just can compensate the indirect emissions. The Commission needs to put something on the table. At the moment, we don't have security for investment. The member companies of Eurometaux, they need to decide on investments, and they don't know if they are compensated or not, and yes, to what proportion. So there is a problem of carbon leakage. Let's discuss it. But on the other hand, you won't solve the problem of carbon leakage by just saying we have no problem with the carbon price, so why are you worrying? So let's bring the arguments together and find a solution and find a wording that is addressing both problems. That I think is what is the challenge now.
Yeah, there was a question about how would it all work out. There are three comments I would like to make. The first is what the Commission proposed as part of the Energy Efficiency Directive. And to be absolutely clear, we in DG Climate, we are absolutely in favor of improvements related to energy efficiency. But the point is that if you act on energy efficiency, the side impact is that there is a number of allowances that are not used on the market, and in order to have the incentive prevailed, you have to take these allowances out. So what the Commission said in the Energy Efficiency Directive, let's go for the energy efficient objective, and once we have a decision precisely on how to do that, we are going to correct the amount of allowances in the market. That's one. The second thing that is now in the debate is about the linear factor. That's another debate. It's another way of setting aside, changing the linear factor from 1.74 to 2 or 225 or 250 or whatever. That is not a subject of any proposal by the Commission at this point in time. Let's be clear about that. And that would require a proposal by the Commission and a process through codecision. And the third element that is also somewhere, somehow in the debate is through the auctioning regulation, because the timing and the modalities of the auctioning pattern could still be modified, but that is through comitology. So these are three different patterns. Energy efficiency, what the Commission was bringing forward was for the energy efficiency gains. There is a corresponding amount of allowances that may have to be taken out in order to prevent the price going down to zero. 1. 2, the correction of the linear factor, which is not a proposal by the Commission, but may be ultimately the proposal, but that is a co-decision route. And third, the auctioning regulation that is going through comitology. These are the three options, and I feel that in the debate, people are jumping sometimes from one to the other, but I just wanted to clarify what the different mechanics could be and what the Commission proposed and did not propose.
Just to follow up on that question, it was phrased as how do you ensure that it's a one-off intervention and you don't have an unpredictable situation where every time the price drops that people come back. In your view, do all three of those options satisfy the idea that you maintain predictability in the system? Or what does one do better than the others?
Well, in all three, we are going to a process where qualified majority voting is involved. So it's not a question that you go overnight and you are changing the amount. I think in all three, you have a decent political debate about what to do and what not to do. So I think that is useful to clarify, and that is not different from setting the objective like we did when we were adopting the EU ETS in 2009. We also had to define the target, and in function of that, the modalities according to which the target would have to be delivered. So I would also guard a little bit, too much of uncertainty that may be created, because from time to time you have to set your target. And what the Commission does not want to do is to go into price management. We said it all over again. I think Commissioner Hedegaard was very clear a couple of days ago that the price management on this market is not in the cards. This is a market, but you can have a decent debate about how you organize that market. After all, it's an artificial market, and it is about supply and demand, and the number of allowances that you put on the market, and the demand for those allowances that are being stipulated in your regulations. So I think that the Commission so far has a standing record of not intervening on this market, and refuses any attempts to intervene on this market.
I'm not quite sure, so let's maybe take two from over here, because we had two from this block, and we have time.
Hi, Damien Morris from Sandbag. I just wanted to address Robert a couple of points on the market interference concern, and that Mr. Delbecq has partly addressed then. I think Alan Svoboda of Chairs very articulately discussed one concern about market interference when he raised the issue that this is an artificial market. It is a politically determined cap, not a scientific one that fell from the sky, and we need to remember that those caps were set in relation to what was considered feasible against business as usual expectations of emissions when they were set. And just looking at how those caps have been set in relation to background emissions, if the scheme did not exist, the cap has been set higher than where emissions would have been in phase 1 and phase 2 if the scheme did not exist. And even the marginal abatement that we've seen driven in fuel switching in the power sector that Mr. Delbecq referred to at the start, that was based on a false expectation of scarcity at the start of phase 1 and the start of phase 2, which temporarily pushed up the carbon price. So that's one issue on the market interference issue there. But also, the ETS caps were not designed to drive, to incentivise or reward emissions reductions achieved through lowering output. They were designed to deliver a price signal to drive low carbon investment, to drive active abatement, and that's clearly not happening at the moment.
Do you want to take that as a question and come back to it?
First of all, last one, I mean, clearly, also legally speaking, talk to the legal service if you want. It's not for what you're saying. That would have been, you can change that by law, of course. Huh? The origin is to get to a cost-efficient way to reach the cap. That's it. It's not to promote something else. But if you want to something else, then you can vote for that, and that is my problem, and I don't want to repeat myself. Then you would actually do change that by the back door. That's why I think we should not have here an ETS revision 4 already via the back door. And you also can say, yeah, that's a co-decision. That's true, but that's not a revision. We had like a couple of years for revision 3, and now we have revision 4 in one process. That's not a good way to do it. The process for ETS is in place. The cap was in place, and you might not agree with it. And therefore, there is also a process in place to revise that. It's called the ETS review. It's coming, and that is a proper process to do that. So the other thing is, of course, it's crisis. So I'm a little bit worried what I hear from you and your colleague, of course, is that basically what you want to do is, one of the reasons why the ETS price is low is because it's crisis, and basically what you want to do is worsen the crisis. And I'm already hearing it from you saying, yeah, but you have no emissions, because we have indirect emissions. If we have a 250 roadmap, a zinc industry, if you close them or you keep them in Europe, they have no emissions because they are indirect emissions. Aluminium has a little bit, also some direct emissions. But basically, if you close them or keep them here, the industry, in 250, if the power sector is basically no emissions, you have very few emissions, but you still have an industry or closing. There's an industry somewhere else putting much more indirect emission in the output. It's your choice, or our choice together. But it's a very strange thing to hear that, oh, you're just a small emitter directly, which is true, because we emit indirectly. So we basically dismiss all the jobs there and all the industries in there. And we're not the only ones like this. We have a collection of those. You just dismiss those industries for a sacrifice for something which may deliver to something. This is not, for me, serious in the debate. Is that this is some back over at the Greens position? And I agree you have to deal with, indeed, the power sector emissions are larger than ours. That's fine. But you cannot dismiss things as unimportant in the debate. Sorry. So I hope that's an answer.
Okay. Brian, you're itching to come back, so I'll just let you come back quickly and then we'll take another question.
No one's saying dismiss you. We're just saying let's get it in proportion. It's been said already this evening. No, I'm not saying that's one point that you're small compared to other sectors. And I have some sympathy for you because you weren't in the phase which handed out the huge windfalls of over allowances. So you're not carrying forward a huge surplus. I'm afraid when it comes to other industries, steel and chemicals, well, some parts of the chemicals industries have been in right from the start. They've built up a nice cushion. And as it's also been said before, the benchmarks were set to reward good performance. So you can't say that this isn't rewarding parts of your industry. It is. It's encouraging those who are doing better, and it's punishing those who are the least efficient. That's exactly what we want to see, more investment in more efficient Europe. Now, this can actually help boost our productivity and get us back onto growth. And, you know, when we move to a low-carbon economy, it's not going to be built out of tissue paper. It's going to need aluminium, it's going to need steel, it's going to need cement. So if you're holding back the main policy that drives investment into our low-carbon economy, you're cutting off your own order book. So, I mean, that's the problem, is that we get obsessed with fears that have always proved to be actually overblown and not realised, that you're all going to shut down and move abroad, which actually, if you are shutting down, it's probably not to do with carbon. And we're holding back the one policy that could actually turn Europe into a really great place to invest and build using the steel and aluminium that you all produce. So I'm sorry, it's just, you've got to put it in perspective.
Okay. Let's, Mr. Delbecq wanted to come in and then Peter wanted to say.
I just would like to take up the words that were raised on false expectations at the time that the EU ETS directive was agreed. I think the expectations were very valid at that point in time, but let's not forget that we have the worst economic recession, not only the one of 2008-2009, but we have now, immediately after the second one, 2011-12, and it continues. So the recession that we are having and the falling down of major industrial production is quite historic, and no one could foresee that. And that would argue for a one-off exceptional correction, and that would be the only one, the only good argumentation you could have. But second, what we have today is that in the market, not just for carbon, but in all markets, an over-obsession on the short term. So people think on next quarter, next 3 and 4 quarters, perhaps next year or a couple of years, but there it stops. So the perspective of what is happening 2020, 2030 has completely faded away, not just on the carbon market, but also on other markets. So we have a combined exceptional situation, an exceptional recession, a double dip, we are in that, and the short-sightedness of the market with an over-obsession on the short term. And I think that is quite unique. I would say we never saw that before.